Today, we're going to talk about the 2 prerequisites that you should have in place before you start learning in public. The second video in this Learn in Public series was titled Start Before You're Ready. And I just got a wonderful comment in response to that video that posed a very good and relevant question. A perfect follow-up, I think, to that idea of launching a thing, starting to share your work even before you're ready, before you're fully confident, before you know exactly what you're doing or where you're going. And that comment came from Raven. So first of all, thank you, Raven, for that great question. Here is what Raven asked. What is your trigger to start learning something new if you want to sustain it and sustain what you already have in place? I sometimes feel like I may be splintering myself to keep starting before I'm ready if I have too many plates spinning at once. Great question. And first, I hope you all appreciate the meta-ness of this visual series right here. The fact that via this Learn in Public video series, we are learning together the important questions surrounding the very idea of learning in public. The ability for me to share some ideas via these videos, and for you all wonderful people to ask questions so that there's this ongoing conversation component that makes this really worthwhile and is a very good example of the benefits that come from learning in public, because people have the ability to interact with the things that you make and ask questions and add more depth to whatever it is that you are working on. So let's dig into that question a little bit. To me, and to iterate on or expand on that idea a little bit more, this is such a good question that I hadn't thought of myself. So it required putting that idea of start before you're ready out there, someone else seeing it, in this case Raven, commenting on it, that got me thinking about something that I hadn't thought about before, that is going to make the webinar coming up on December 1st better, and the course that will follow that webinar better as well. So, good case study, small example of the benefits of doing this. Let's get into that question. I have 2 prerequisites for starting to learn in public. Prerequisite number 1 here is long-term interest. So to be able to have confidence, even if you're not fully confident in the skills that you're learning or in sharing things in a public way, but to be willing to invest the time learning in public, I think you first have to have long-term interest in whatever the skill it is that you are developing. In my case, the first example from my life of doing this learning in public is the graphic recorder, which is kind of a fun case study from my past to think back on and explore a little bit now that I have, to some degree, a relative distance from that project. I started thegraphicrecorder.com as a place to build my visual note-taking, sketchnoting, graphic recording skills. And the reason I had no problem buying a website and starting to blog and sharing work in that way is because of the combined interest in, one, just a general desire to increase my own creativity or tap into and build my creative muscles. I knew that's something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and that was a great starting point for that. And then also just the visual skills, the drawing and the typography and the fun things around expressing and capturing, processing ideas in this visual way, that there was enough space to play around there, that visual thinking is a broad enough field that I wouldn't get bored. So that the graphic recorder then became this playground where I got to explore those topics as I was building my skills. And at this point, at least about 5 years down the road, I still have not lost interest in that field. And even though I haven't updated the graphic recorder in about a year, it's still there. It still provides that record of the first stage in my journey. And it's a place that at some point in the relative near future, I plan to go back to and update and continue sharing ideas in that space to kind of not fully catch up on the journey necessarily since I stopped, but to keep having that be a place to record my own progress in this field of visual thinking. So that's how long-term interest played out in my example of the graphic recorder. Let's look at the second prereq. Prereq number 2 is having time set aside. So this piece is important here, which I've represented with little simple clock icons here along this long-term journey that you will be making. And this gets to the having too many plates spinning at once component to Raven's question there, that you need to create the space to dedicate to this thing that you're learning in public. And I think even if it's as small as 15 minutes a day, I think there's a lot of progress that you can make if you have 15 minutes of focused time every single day. And one of the things that I realized via this question that I want to build as a resource for you is some sort of template resource to help you plan out what your daily chunk of time allotted to learning in public, daily or weekly. It could be an hour on the weekend or a couple hours on a Sunday or something, as if carving out time every single day isn't in the cards. But having time set aside, preferably daily, but absolutely weekly at the most spread out. Having that time set aside to be able to dedicate to this thing that you're learning in public is hugely important. And what that will likely mean is sacrificing some other activities of yours. And one way this is played out in my life related to the graphic recorder, first I should mention that I spent a good this guy is small and the line is long for a reason. The real benefits of doing this, I think they become exponential over time, but there is this initial period of time that it takes for you to start seeing any sort of external benefits to doing this learning in public. The moment you start doing it, you get your own benefits in terms of the speed at which you're learning the new skills in your own personal development. That happens the moment you choose to start reflecting on what you're learning and sharing it, because the act of reflection and sharing will deepen the learning process. But when it comes to external benefits, like maybe getting some freelance work or making some products of some sort or starting a business, or if those are some of the goals that you are working towards, those are the things that tend to happen after you've kind of built up a body of work there. So in my case, with the graphic recorder, I spent a good year. Well, that was the only thing that I was working on. And pretty much every day I would do something and try to share something related to the development of my skills in that field of sketchnoting and graphic recording. But since sketchnoting and visual thinking were kind of, for me, a gateway to other creative interests, there came a point when I started trying new things, building new projects. And for a while there, I was trying a bunch of new things and trying to keep 4 or 5 things going at once, have those 4 or 5 plates spinning in the air and trying to keep all of them going. And eventually I realized that I wasn't going to be able to do that I was spreading myself too thin. So I kind of had to pare down, take some of those projects off the table, and I chose to focus just on, at first, just one thing in addition to the graphic recorder, and that was verbal to visual, which made a nice pair actually, because verbal to visual is where I teach visual thinking skills. So the graphic recorder was kind of my own personal playground. Then I decided to kind of bring my high school teaching background to the table and start building this new project, Verbal to Visual, with the goal of helping others develop and apply their sketchnoting skills. And that was about a year, more like a year and a half ago, that I started Verbal to Visual, and only within this past month did I have the space to be able to now start Learn in Public, even though this idea has been on my mind for a long time and was actually that the first iteration of Learn in Public was one of those projects that when I had too many things going at once. One of those projects was called Revolutionary Learning, which still exists. Go check out revolutionarylearning.com if you want to see the first iteration of Learn in Public. But I had to cut it because I wasn't giving enough time to the graphic recorder or then to verbal to visual. But those things can kind of come back once the things you first started. There's a certain amount of momentum that you want to make sure your existing projects have before you add on anything new. So to kind of sum up the importance of these two prerequisites here is to do this first for one thing. I think there's a level of focus that is required at the start of any sort of creative endeavor, even and especially when you've got lots of ideas. There's lots of things you want to start, maybe all of which you're excited about. I think it's worthwhile to pick the one that you're most interested in and that maybe most directly maps to the future that you're walking toward, to call back to the last video episode, and focus on that one thing and set time aside each day or each week to build that thing. And only once that kind of has its own momentum going, only then start thinking about whether or not you want to get another thing off of the ground, and only actually get it off the ground if you know that you can set a certain amount of time to that new thing. So those are the two prerequisites as I see them to start learning in public. Notice what's not on this prerequisite. No skills are a prerequisite. Confidence is not a prerequisite. Any particular equipment is not a prerequisite. All of those things you can learn and develop over time. So if you have long-term interest in this thing and you have the ability to set aside at least 15 minutes a day or an hour each weekend, an hour each week, then that's all you need to get started. And everything else from there, I can help you with, and I want to help you with. And that's what Learn in Public is all about. So my question for you today: do those two things exist for whatever you're thinking about starting, the skill or project that you want to apply these ideas of learning in public toward? Do you have long-term interest, and have you already, or are you able to set time aside on a daily or weekly basis? Let me know if those two things are in place for you, and that will give you confidence, I hope, to start in whatever way that looks. Thank you guys for watching. See you again soon.